I spent 3 hours examining the frozen body of a creature that should not exist, and what I found rewrote everything I thought I knew about predators. The rangers who killed it gave me 1 day to document its biology before they destroyed all evidence, and in that time I discovered why witnesses describe these things with such terror. The muscular structure, the brain capacity, the sensory adaptations, they all pointed to one disturbing conclusion. Dogmen are not just stronger than wolves or smarter than bears, they are designed specifically to hunt humans. So before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you are watching from. Thanks. Let me give you context about what Dogman sightings typically describe. Reports come from across the United States and Canada, with concentrated activity in Michigan, Wisconsin, and the Pacific Northwest. Witnesses consistently describe bipedal canines with wolf-like heads, powerful shoulders, and the ability to run on 2 legs or drop to all 4s for incredible speed. Unlike werewolf legends, these creatures show no connection to lunar cycles or transformation. They simply exist as a species we have not classified. The folklore goes back further than European settlement. Indigenous peoples across the continent have stories of wolfmen who walk upright and hunt with intelligence that surpasses regular wolves. The Navajo speak of creatures that blur the line between animal and something else. The Cree have legends of beings that took canine form but possessed human cunning. When colonists arrived, they brought their own werewolf myths, but the American accounts describe something different, something more physical and less supernatural. Modern sightings follow patterns that suggest real animals rather than folklore. Witnesses report them near deer migration routes during autumn, around salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest, and in areas with high concentrations of elk or moose. They avoid human settlements most of the year, but seem drawn to areas where hunting is good. The encounters are brief, often at dawn or dusk, and the creatures typically flee when discovered. That behavior matches apex predators protecting territory rather than supernatural entities. The rangers who contacted me worked in a remote section of national forest where hunting was prohibited, but poaching remained common. They had responded to reports of illegal deer hunting when they found the Dogman instead. According to their account, the creature had been feeding on a deer carcass when it detected their approach. It charged them rather than fleeing, and they fired in panic. 3 rifle shots at close range brought it down. They were terrified but also curious enough to preserve what they had killed. They transported the body to a remote ranger station, with industrial freezers used for storing confiscated game. They kept it frozen for 2 weeks while debating what to do. Reporting it would mean scrutiny, questions, and likely dismissal from their positions. They decided instead to find someone who could examine it properly, then dispose of the evidence and never speak of it again. I arrived at the station after dark, following coordinates they had sent through encrypted channels. The location was deliberately isolated, hours from the nearest town, accessible only by logging roads that most maps did not show. 2 rangers met me at the entrance, both armed and clearly nervous. They led me to a back building where industrial equipment hummed. Neither spoke during the walk. The tension was obvious and understandable. The freezer room was kept at -20 degrees, cold enough to preserve tissue but not cold enough to prevent examination with the right equipment. They had laid the body on a steel examination table under bright fluorescent lights. When I first saw it, my breath stopped, not from the cold, but from the realization that everything I had studied for 2 decades was suddenly, undeniably real. This was not a bear, not a wolf, not any known species. This was something else, entirely. The size struck me first. The creature measured 7 feet 3 inches from heel to crown when laid flat. The proportions were wrong for any known mammal. The torso was too long, the shoulders too broad, the legs too muscular for the skeletal frame. The head was massive, larger than any wolf I had studied, with a cranial capacity that suggested significant brain development. The muzzle was elongated but shorter than a natural wolf, and the jaw structure showed adaptations for both tearing and crushing. I spent the first hour simply documenting measurements and taking photographs from every angle. The rangers had agreed to give me 24 hours, and I could not waste time on shock or disbelief. I needed data, documentation, anything that could be verified later when this body no longer existed. I measured bone lengths, took tissue samples, examined the dental structure, and documented every visible feature with the clinical detachment that 20 years of field research had trained into me. The musculature was the first major discovery. The creature possessed muscle groups that do not exist in wolves or dogs, but are present in primates. The shoulders showed deltoid development similar to humans, allowing for a range of motion that would enable tool use or climbing. The chest muscles were enormous, providing support for bipedal posture and the ability to stand upright for extended periods. The legs showed both human-like quadriceps for upright walking and canine-like hamstrings for powerful bursts of speed on all fours. The forearms were particularly fascinating. The radius and ulna were longer than wolf proportions but shorter than human. The wrist joint showed greater flexibility than any wolf, allowing for rotation and manipulation. The paws were not true paws but something between paws and hands, 5 digits on each, with the first digit positioned like an opposable thumb, though not as fully developed as human thumbs. The claws were retractable, sitting in sheaths when not extended, an adaptation I have never seen in canines. The skeletal structure revealed even more. The spine showed curvature that supported upright posture, with lumbar vertebrae shaped more like human than wolf. The pelvis was wider than wolf hips, positioned to support bipedal locomotion while still allowing for quadrupedal movement. The legs were digitigrade like wolves, meaning it walked on its toes rather than flat-footed, but the bones were thicker and stronger than wolf bones, able to support the weight of upright walking for hours. The skull was perhaps the most revealing feature. The cranial capacity measured approximately 1,000 cubic centimeters, larger than any wolf but smaller than the average human. The brain case showed development in areas associated with spatial reasoning and problem-solving. The eye sockets were positioned more forward-facing than wolves, providing better depth perception for hunting. The jaw articulation allowed for a bite force that I estimated at over 1,000 pounds per square inch, comparable to hyenas but in a much larger skull. The teeth told their own story. The incisors were sharp and forward-set, designed for gripping. The canines measured over 2 inches long, curved slightly backward to prevent prey from escaping once bitten. The premolars showed both cutting edges and crushing surfaces, allowing the creature to process both meat and bone. The molars were reduced compared to wolves, suggesting a diet almost entirely carnivorous with little need to grind plant material. The sensory organs showed adaptations for nocturnal hunting. The eyes were large with a tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer that makes animal eyes shine in darkness. This structure improves night vision by reflecting light back through the retina. The positioning and size suggested vision roughly 6 times better than human in low light. The nasal cavity was enormous, larger than any wolf, with turbinate bones that increased surface area for scent detection. I estimated olfactory capability at least 50 times better than human. The ears were mobile and independently controlled by complex muscle groups. They could rotate to track sounds from different directions simultaneously. The inner ear structure showed development that would provide excellent directional hearing and balance. Combined with the vision and scent capabilities, this creature could track prey through dense forest in complete darkness using multiple sensory inputs that would overwhelm most predators. The respiratory system revealed adaptations for sustained running. The lungs were oversized for the body cavity, providing oxygen capacity far beyond wolves or humans. The rib cage was barrel-shaped, allowing for full expansion during heavy exertion. The heart was proportionally large, positioned slightly higher in the chest than human hearts, with muscle walls that suggested incredible cardiovascular endurance. This creature could run for hours without tiring. The digestive system was short and efficient, typical of pure carnivores. The stomach was large and expandable, allowing it to consume massive amounts of meat in a single feeding. The intestines were relatively short, designed for processing animal protein rather than plant matter. The liver was enormous, capable of processing high levels of protein and fat. This was an obligate carnivore, unable to survive on anything but meat. The integumentary system showed something I had not expected. The fur was double-layered like wolves, with a soft undercoat for insulation and a coarse outer layer for protection. But beneath the fur, the skin showed something unusual. Small patches of thickened, almost scale-like skin appeared on the shoulders, chest, and forearms. These patches were not true scales, but extremely tough dermal armor, possibly providing protection during fights with prey or other dogmen. The paw pads were unusually thick, over an inch in some areas, providing cushioning for bipedal walking while maintaining sensitivity for quadrupedal movement. The pads showed wear patterns consistent with both walking upright and running on all fours. Dirt and debris embedded in the pads indicated forest terrain, confirming the ranger's account of where they had encountered it. I took samples from every major organ and tissue type, preserving them in chemical solutions the rangers had obtained from a local veterinary clinic. These samples would be all that remained when the body was destroyed. I documented the cellular structure under a portable microscope, noting unusual chromosome counts that did not match wolves, dogs, or any known canid. The genetic material suggested something that had diverged from the canid family tree millions of years ago. The reproductive system indicated a male specimen in its prime, probably between 8 and 12 years old, based on tooth wear and bone fusion. The testes were descended and functional, suggesting these creatures followed seasonal breeding patterns like wolves. The lack of scarring or old injuries suggested this individual had been dominant in its territory, facing little competition from other predators. Around hour 12, I began examining the throat and vocal apparatus. The larynx was positioned lower than in wolves, more similar to human vocal structure. The hyoid bone showed development that would allow for a range of vocalizations beyond typical canine sounds. The vocal cords were thick and heavily muscularized. This creature could likely produce howls, growls, and barks like wolves, but also other sounds, possibly including mimicry of human voices or other species. This discovery connected to numerous witness reports of dogmen making sounds that seemed designed to lure or confuse prey. Hunters had reported hearing human screams in forests where no humans should be. Hikers had described hearing their names called in familiar voices from empty woods. If these creatures could manipulate their vocal apparatus to approximate human speech patterns, it would give them a significant hunting advantage against human prey. The forelimbs revealed more evidence of intelligence. The shoulder socket allowed for full rotation, and the elbow joint bent at angles that would permit manipulation of objects. The digits, while not as dexterous as human fingers, could clearly grasp and manipulate items. Scratch marks on trees could be made with precision. Rocks could be thrown. Simple tools could possibly be used. This was not just a predator, but a thinking predator capable of problem solving. I found something else in the stomach contents. The rangers had killed it shortly after it had been feeding, so the digestive process had not progressed far. Among the deer tissue, I found fragments of fabric, pieces of synthetic material that could only come from human clothing. I also found a small metal button and several strands of human hair. This creature had consumed human flesh recently within the past week based on the digestion state. That discovery changed everything. This was not just a cryptid eating deer in remote forests. This was a predator that had learned to hunt humans. The rangers confirmed that several hikers had gone missing in the region over the past year. Disappearances that had been attributed to getting lost or falling from cliffs. Now there was another explanation, one that would never appear in official reports. The implications became darker as I continued my examination. The brain structure showed development in regions associated with planning and strategy. The frontal lobe was more developed than wolves, suggesting capacity for delayed gratification and complex hunting strategies. These creatures could plan ambushes, remember the patterns of prey, and adapt their tactics based on past experiences. They were not just animals following instinct, but intelligent predators making calculated decisions. The cardiovascular system revealed adaptations that explained reports of incredible endurance. The heart chambers were proportioned differently from wolves, with thicker ventricle walls suggesting higher blood pressure and cardiac output. The arteries were unusually elastic, allowing them to expand during intense activity without bursting. This creature could sustain maximum exertion for extended periods, running down prey over distances that would exhaust wolves or humans. The blood vessels in the brain showed extensive collateral circulation, meaning multiple pathways supplied oxygen to critical regions. This redundancy would protect brain function during physical trauma or oxygen deprivation. It also suggested the species had faced evolutionary pressure from head injuries, developing protection against the concussive impacts of hunting large prey. The blood itself, from frozen samples, showed elevated red blood cell counts and hemoglobin concentrations, increasing oxygen carrying capacity. I examined the damage from the gunshots that had killed it. 3 bullets had struck the creature, 1 in the chest and 2 in the abdomen. The chest wound had penetrated the lung but had not immediately incapacitated it. The abdominal wounds had caused internal bleeding but were not instantly fatal. The rangers reported that the creature had continued fighting for several minutes after being shot, attempting to reach them despite the wounds. That kind of tenacity and pain tolerance exceeded anything in normal wolves. The wound channels showed something else interesting. The bullets had penetrated but had not expanded or fragmented as they would in normal tissue. The muscle density and connective tissue toughness had limited bullet deformation, reducing the damage below what those caliber rounds would typically cause. This was not supernatural resistance but simple biology, muscles so dense and tough that they acted as natural armor against projectiles. The spinal column showed remarkable flexibility despite the size and power of the creature. The vertebrae had large processes for muscle attachment, but also extensive cartilage padding between them. This allowed for the flexibility needed to switch between bipedal and quadrupedal locomotion without injury. The spinal cord itself was well protected, set deep within the vertebral column with extra bone shielding in the neck and lower back regions. I spent significant time examining the hands as they represented one of the most human-like features. The metacarpal bones were elongated but retained the robust structure needed for weight-bearing during quadrupedal movement. The finger bones showed prominent ridges where tendons attached, indicating powerful grip strength. The thumb, while not fully opposable, could press against the other fingers with enough force to grip tree branches or manipulate objects. The palm pads were deeply ridged in patterns unique to the individual, similar to human fingerprints. These ridges would provide traction for gripping and climbing, while also potentially serving as individual identification markers within the species. If Dogman had social structures complex enough to recognize individuals, these palm patterns combined with facial features and scent would provide multiple identification methods. The claws deserved their own detailed examination. Each claw was approximately 2 inches long when fully extended, curved and razor sharp. They were made of keratin like wolf claws but were thicker and more robust. The retraction mechanism was more cat-like than wolf-like, with ligaments that pulled the claws into protective sheaths when relaxed. This kept them sharp by preventing wear during walking, while allowing rapid extension for climbing, fighting, or gripping prey. The hind limbs showed adaptations I had not seen in any other mammal. The femur was angled to support both upright walking and quadrupedal running without compromising either gait. The knee joint had extra cartilage and ligament support, allowing it to lock in extension for standing or bend tightly for crouching and jumping. The ankle was perhaps the most remarkable joint, capable of both the plantarflexion needed for bipedal walking and the dorsiflexion required for digitigrade running. The foot itself was a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. The metatarsals were long and strong, with the weight distribution capable of shifting between bipedal and quadrupedal postures. The heel pad was thick and shock-absorbent for bipedal walking. The toe pads were sensitive and flexible for feeling terrain during quadrupedal running. The entire structure could adapt its shape and function depending on the gait being used. I discovered evidence of previous injuries that had healed. The left forearm showed a fracture that had healed cleanly, probably from a fall or fight years earlier. Several ribs showed old breaks that had mended with slight deformities. The right hip showed signs of old trauma, possibly from being kicked by prey. These healed injuries demonstrated both the violence of their lifestyle and their remarkable capacity for recovery. This individual had survived injuries that would have killed most wild animals. The bone density was remarkable, much higher than human or wolf. The skeletal structure could absorb impacts that would shatter normal bones. The muscle attachment points showed stress patterns indicating the creature regularly engaged in activities requiring tremendous force. These were not fragile animals. They were built to withstand violence, to survive injuries that would kill most predators. The bone density was remarkable, much higher than human or wolf. I took samples for microscopic examination and found that the bone structure had more hydroxyapatite crystals and less marrow space than typical mammal bones. This made them heavier, but also much stronger and more resistant to fracture. The trade-off was reduced blood cell production from marrow, but the spleen and liver were enlarged to compensate for this, producing blood cells in greater quantities than the reduced marrow. The bone microstructure showed stress patterns indicating the creature regularly engaged in activities requiring tremendous force. The muscle attachment points had built up extra bone mass over years of use, creating pronounced ridges and processes. This bone remodeling demonstrated a life of constant physical exertion, climbing, running, fighting, and hunting with a ferocity that left permanent marks on the skeleton itself. I compared the skull measurements to every known wolf and dog breed, looking for any possible conventional explanation. The cranial capacity exceeded timber wolves by 40%. The zygomatic arches, the cheekbones, were massively built to support jaw muscles capable of generating crushing bite force. The sagittal crest, a ridge running along the top of the skull, was prominent like in male gorillas, providing attachment for powerful jaw muscles. No wolf displayed such extreme development. The teeth showed wear patterns that revealed hunting preferences. The canines had impact marks consistent with biting into large bones, probably leg bones of elk or moose. The premolars showed wear from shearing through hide and meat. The molars, though reduced, showed enough wear to indicate occasional consumption of cartilage and possibly some plant material during food scarcity. The overall dental health was excellent, with no cavities or infections, suggesting a diet that kept teeth clean naturally. I examined the throat structure more closely, fascinated by the vocal implications. The thyroid cartilage was large and flexible. The hyoid bone was positioned to allow complex tongue movements, and the soft palate could probably be manipulated to create various sounds. Combined with the brain regions associated with vocal learning, this creature could likely produce an impressive range of vocalizations, from wolf-like howls to sounds that might approximate human speech patterns. This vocal ability had dark implications. Numerous witnesses had reported hearing voices in the woods, calls for help that led them into dangerous areas, or their names being called by familiar voices. If dogmen could learn to mimic human speech well enough to lure prey, it represented a hunting strategy of terrifying sophistication. They would not need perfect mimicry, just enough similarity to create curiosity or concern, drawing victims away from safety. The sensory integration suggested by the brain structure was equally impressive. The creature could process visual, auditory, and olfactory information simultaneously, creating a three-dimensional map of its environment that updated constantly. It could track multiple prey animals by scent while listening for movement sounds while watching for visual cues. This multi-sensory awareness would make them nearly impossible to approach undetected. The olfactory bulb, the brain region processing smell, was proportionally huge compared to humans or even wolves. The sensory epithelium in the nasal cavity had an estimated 200 million scent receptors compared to 6 million in humans. But more importantly, the brain devoted substantial processing power to interpreting these signals. The creature could likely identify individual humans by scent, remember those scents for years, and detect humans from miles away depending on wind conditions. The visual cortex showed development suggesting excellent color vision, unusual for predators that hunt primarily at night. Most nocturnal hunters sacrifice color vision for better low-light sensitivity. Dogmen seem to have both, with rod cells for night vision and cone cells for color discrimination. This would allow them to hunt effectively in any lighting condition, from pitch darkness to full daylight, giving them flexibility that pure nocturnal or diurnal hunters lack. The cerebral cortex, the brain region associated with higher thinking, showed folding patterns more complex than wolves. The frontal lobe was particularly well developed, suggesting capacity for planning, decision-making, and impulse control. The parietal lobe showed development associated with spatial reasoning and tool use. The temporal lobe suggested strong memory formation and recall. This creature could learn from experience, remember the results of past decisions, and apply that knowledge to future situations. I spent time examining the claws under magnification, looking for traces of what the creature had climbed or torn. I found wood fibers consistent with oak and pine, suggesting it had climbed trees. I found tissue samples consistent with deer and elk. I found synthetic fibers that could only come from modern clothing or camping gear. These traces painted a picture of a creature that moved through forests using trees for observation and ambush, that hunted large ungulates as primary prey, and that had recently interacted with human-made materials. The muscles of the neck were extraordinarily powerful, capable of supporting the massive skull and generating the force needed for the killing bite that canines employ. The trapezius and sternocleidomastoid muscles were so developed that they created a thick, powerful neck that would be nearly impossible for prey to break free from once bitten. Combined with the jaw strength, this creature could bite and hold almost any animal in North America. The abdominal muscles showed development suggesting frequent bipedal posture. The rectus abdominis and external obliques were much more developed than in wolves, providing the core strength needed to maintain upright balance. The back muscles, particularly the erector spinae group, were equally impressive, supporting the spine during bipedal locomotion and providing the power for rotating the torso during attacks. I examined the tail, finding it shorter than wolf tails but still functional. It was approximately 18 inches long, heavily muscled at the base, and covered in the same double-layered fur as the body. The tail would provide balance during quadrupedal running and serve as a communication tool through position and movement. The bones within were thick and strong, suggesting it might even be used as a weapon, capable of delivering painful strikes. The immune system evidence was limited but suggested robust disease resistance. The thymus was still active despite the creature's age, unusual for mammals where this organ typically atrophies after adolescence. The lymph nodes were numerous and well developed throughout the body. The spleen was enlarged, possibly from the increased blood cell production needs, but also indicating strong immune function. This creature would be resistant to many diseases that affect wolves or humans. The endocrine system showed interesting features. The adrenal glands were proportionally large, capable of producing significant amounts of adrenaline for fight or flight responses. The thyroid was also enlarged, suggesting a high metabolic rate that would require frequent feeding. The pituitary gland showed normal development, and the pineal gland was present and functional, regulating circadian rhythms that kept the creature active during optimal hunting hours. I found evidence suggesting hierarchical social structure in the form of healed bite marks on the shoulders and neck. These were not from prey but from other dogmen, judging by the tooth patterns. The bites had been deep but carefully placed to establish dominance without causing permanent injury. This suggested pack dynamics with social rules that prevented lethal infighting, allowing groups to maintain cohesion while establishing clear hierarchies. The territorial marking behavior was evident in scent glands I discovered near the base of the tail and between the toes. These glands would secrete oils with individual chemical signatures, allowing dogmen to mark territory and identify pack members. The distribution pattern of these glands suggested marking behavior that combined aspects of wolf urination, marking with the more sophisticated scent communication seen in primates. Around hour 18, exhaustion began affecting my work, but I pushed through. This opportunity would never come again. I photographed every angle, measured every bone, documented every unusual feature. I filled 3 notebooks with observations and collected samples in over 200 vials and containers. The rangers watched from the doorway, occasionally checking their watches, reminding me that dawn was approaching and with it the deadline. I focused the final hours on the feet and locomotion. The foot structure was extraordinary, capable of supporting bipedal walking for extended periods but also adapted for explosive quadrupedal sprinting. The Achilles tendon was massively thick, storing and releasing energy with each step. The foot could flex to grip terrain when running upright or splay wide for stability when running on all fours. This creature could match a wolf's speed on level ground, but could also climb, jump, and navigate terrain that wolves could not manage. The balance between human and canine features was not random, but highly specialized. Every adaptation served a purpose in making this creature the perfect apex predator for North American forests. It had the endurance of a wolf, the problem-solving ability approaching human levels, the sensory capabilities exceeding both, and the physical power to take down prey as large as moose or elk. In its environment, nothing could match it. I began forming theories about origins. The divergence from the canid line must have happened millions of years ago, perhaps during the same period when human ancestors diverged from other primates. The development of bipedalism, increased brain capacity, and manual dexterity all suggested parallel evolution, with these creatures developing intelligence and upright posture, while maintaining the predatory instincts and physical capabilities of wolves. The North American continent could have provided perfect conditions for such evolution. During ice ages, large prey animals migrated across land bridges, and predators followed. A canid species that could walk upright to see over tall grass, use forelimbs to manipulate prey or dig dens, and develop pack hunting strategies with enhanced communication would have significant advantages. Over millions of years, these traits would become more pronounced, creating something that was neither wolf nor primate but a unique evolutionary path. The low population numbers made sense from an ecological perspective. Apex predators always exist in lower densities than prey species. Something as large and metabolically demanding as a dogman would require vast territories and abundant prey. They would be naturally secretive, avoiding conflicts with humans who possessed weapons that could harm them. Their intelligence would teach them to remain hidden, to hunt in darkness, to leave minimal evidence. The reports of aggressive behavior toward humans likely represented territorial defense rather than predation. Most encounters describe dogmen fleeing or watching from a distance. The few attacks probably occurred when humans stumbled into core territories, during breeding seasons, or when young were present. The stomach contents showing human remains were unusual and possibly indicated a rogue individual, an outlier in behavior, just as some wolves or bears occasionally become man-eaters. As dawn approached, I completed my final examinations and began packing my samples and equipment. The rangers had made their intentions clear. The body would be destroyed, reduced to ash in an industrial incinerator they had access to through Forestry Service connections. No trace would remain except my documentation, and even that I would have to keep secret to protect them from legal consequences. I asked them if I could take tissue samples for DNA analysis. They agreed, understanding that genetic proof might eventually matter more than photographs or measurements. I collected muscle, organ, bone, and hair samples, preserving them in solutions that would maintain the genetic material for years. These samples now reside in a secure storage facility under false labels, waiting for the day when science might be willing to examine them without prejudice. Before leaving, I asked the rangers what they planned to do with their knowledge. They said they would continue their work, continue protecting the forests, but they would never speak of what they had found. They had families, careers, lives that would be destroyed by association with cryptozoology. I understood and promised to protect their identities. The cryptozoology community has its own codes, its own ways of sharing information without exposing sources. The drive away from that ranger station was surreal. I had spent 24 hours with proof that cryptozoology was real, that creatures dismissed as folklore actually existed, but I had no way to share that proof without destroying the lives of the men who had trusted me. The samples I carried represented the most significant cryptozoological discovery in history, but they would remain in storage, perhaps for decades, perhaps forever. I spent the following months analyzing my photographs and notes, comparing the biological features to known species, and researching evolutionary paths that could explain the dogmen. I consulted with biologists and anatomists without revealing the source of my questions, framing them as hypothetical discussions about convergent evolution and mammalian adaptation. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that these creatures represented a genuine evolutionary lineage. The intelligence factor remained the most disturbing aspect. An apex predator with problem-solving abilities approaching human levels, operating in small packs with sophisticated communication, would be nearly impossible to track or study. They would learn from every human encounter, adapt their behavior to avoid detection, and pass that knowledge to offspring through teaching rather than just instinct. Each generation would be harder to find than the last. The territorial ranges must be enormous, perhaps hundreds of square miles per individual or family group. That would explain the rarity of sightings and the difficulty of finding physical evidence. A creature that covers that much ground, primarily at night, using game trails and waterways that leave minimal tracks, could exist for decades in a region without ever being conclusively documented. The few sightings that did occur would seem random, scattered across vast areas and years. The pack structure likely mirrored wolves, with alpha pairs breeding and subordinate members helping raise young. But the extended childhood required for creatures with large brains and complex behaviors would mean years of parental investment. Young dogmen would need to learn hunting strategies, territory boundaries, and avoidance behaviors. That long learning period would make them vulnerable, forcing packs to be even more secretive during breeding and raising of offspring. The feeding requirements were substantial. A 7-foot, 300-pound carnivore with high metabolism would need several pounds of meat daily. A family group would require constant hunting success, explaining why they appear near deer migration routes and elk populations. They would also take smaller prey, opportunistically hunting whatever was available, which could include pets, livestock, and occasionally humans who ventured too far into their territories. The seasonal patterns mentioned in reports made sense now. Increased sightings in autumn matched the need to build fat reserves before winter. Spring sightings coincided with breeding season territorial disputes. Summer brought fewer reports because prey was abundant and widely distributed, reducing the need for risky hunting near human areas. Winter sightings were rare, suggesting they denned up during the coldest months or moved to lower elevations. The regional variations in reports probably reflected different subspecies or populations adapted to local conditions. Pacific Northwest dogmen might be larger, adapted for hunting elk and moose in dense forests. Midwest populations might be smaller and faster, adapted for open hardwood forests and white-tailed deer. Southern populations could have thinner coats and different coloring. These regional differences would make classification even more difficult. The mythology around them was partly accurate. They did hunt at night using superior senses. They did move with speed that seemed supernatural. They did demonstrate intelligence that unnerved witnesses. But they were not shapeshifters or cursed humans or supernatural entities. They were animals, highly specialized animals, that evolution had crafted into perfect nocturnal predators for North American forests. The question of why science has not discovered them officially has multiple answers. The population is small and widely distributed. They are primarily nocturnal and extremely reclusive. Their intelligence allows them to avoid human contact. The academic ridicule associated with cryptozoology prevents serious scientific investigation. And perhaps most importantly, any government that confirmed their existence would face massive liability issues regarding public safety in national forests and parks. I believe evidence has been found and suppressed multiple times. Rangers, hunters, and rural residents have certainly encountered them. Some of those encounters resulted in deaths attributed to bear attacks or accidents. Bodies have probably been found and quietly disposed of to avoid panic. Government agencies tasked with public safety would have strong motivation to keep such discoveries secret, rather than admit that apex predators capable of hunting humans exist in recreational areas. The question of what to do with this knowledge keeps me awake at night. Publishing my findings would expose the rangers to prosecution. It would invite ridicule from the scientific community. It might cause panic in regions where dogmen exist. But keeping silent means people remain unaware of potential dangers. Hikers venture into territories where apex predators lurk. Families camp in areas where something far more dangerous than bears hunts. I have shared my findings carefully within trusted cryptozoology circles. Others have come forward with similar experiences, examinations of partial remains, or extensive documentation of territories where dogmen appear to concentrate. We have built a database of information that exists outside official channels, waiting for the day when science might be ready to acknowledge what we have found. The biological reality of dogmen changes how we must think about wilderness safety. These are not random animals, but intelligent predators with excellent memory and learning capability. They observe humans, learn our patterns, and exploit our vulnerabilities. Making noise on trails might not deter them if they have learned that humans are not dangerous. Bear spray might be ineffective against their size and determination. The advice to appear large and back away slowly assumes you are dealing with an animal that fears humans. Dogmen likely do not fear humans in the same way bears or wolves do. They have learned to avoid us not from fear but from calculated risk assessment. They know we have weapons that can harm them. They know we travel in groups and can summon help. They avoid us because conflict is risky, not because they could not win that conflict. That makes them fundamentally different from other predators in North American wilderness. The implications for families of missing persons are heavy. How many disappearances attributed to getting lost or accidents actually represented predation? How many partial remains found in forests were explained away as bear attacks when something else was responsible? The truth would devastate families who had found some closure in official explanations. It would force reopening of cold cases and admission that authorities had either been ignorant or had deliberately concealed the truth. The future of dogman populations remains uncertain. Habitat loss continues reducing the territories where they can exist undetected. Human recreation expands into previously remote areas. Climate change alters the distribution of prey species they depend on. These pressures could force them into more frequent contact with humans, leading to increased conflict, or it could drive them to extinction, removing them before science ever acknowledges their existence. I continue my research, documenting sightings, interviewing witnesses, and collecting any physical evidence I can obtain. The samples from that frozen body represent the most complete biological documentation we have, but I hope they will not be the last. I hope someday the scientific community will be willing to examine the evidence without prejudice, to consider the possibility that our understanding of North American megafauna is incomplete. Until then, I work in the shadows of academia, connecting with other researchers who have seen what I have seen, who know what I know. We share information through encrypted channels, support each other through the isolation that comes from possessing knowledge that cannot be shared widely. We document everything, hoping that future generations might benefit from what we have learned. If you spend time in wilderness areas where dogmen have been reported, take precautions that go beyond normal wildlife safety. Travel in groups. Avoid areas at dawn and dusk when they are most active. Be aware that making noise might attract rather than deter them. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. If you hear sounds that do not match known animals, leave the area immediately. If you find tracks that cannot be explained, document them but do not follow them. Understand that these creatures are not supernatural, but they are extraordinary. They represent an evolutionary path that parallels our own in some ways while remaining fundamentally different. They are intelligent, powerful, and perfectly adapted to their environment. They have survived in secrecy for thousands of years by being smarter than the people who hunted them. Respecting that capability is not paranoia, but recognition of biological reality. The frozen body I examined that day has been destroyed, reduced to ash and scattered. But the knowledge it provided remains, documented in notebooks and preserved samples. That creature taught me more about cryptid biology than decades of field research. It showed me that the line between known and unknown species is thinner than science admits. It proved that our forests still hold secrets, that apex predators exist in the shadows of our civilization. I think about that day often, standing in that freezer examining something that should not exist according to accepted zoology. I remember the weight of the skull in my hands, the thickness of the muscles, the size of the teeth. I remember thinking that if this creature had chosen to hunt me rather than deer, I would have had no chance of survival. The rangers who killed it had been lucky, their shots accurate under pressure that would have paralyzed most people. I wonder how many dogmen remain in North American forests. Are there hundreds? Thousands? Are they declining toward extinction or maintaining stable populations? Do they know that humans have documented their existence? Do they care? These questions haunt me because the answers matter for both species. Humans deserve to know what shares their recreational spaces. Dogmen deserve recognition and protection if they are endangered. The biological evidence I gathered suggests a species that has existed for millions of years, that has survived ice ages and mass extinctions, that has adapted to every change in climate and ecosystem. They are survivors in the truest sense, creatures that have carved out a niche in one of the most challenging predator environments on Earth. North American forests host bears, wolves, cougars, and other apex predators. Dogmen have coexisted with all of them, remaining dominant in their territories. For now, the knowledge remains confined to small circles of researchers and the people who have encountered them directly. For now, the forests keep their secrets, and the dogmen continue their existence in the shadows. For now, science continues to dismiss what it hasn't officially examined. But truth has a way of emerging, evidence accumulates, and someday the questions will become too loud to ignore. When that day comes, perhaps my documentation will contribute to understanding these remarkable creatures. Until then, I keep my samples secure, my notes protected, and my identity separated from my research. I continue investigating reports, supporting other researchers, and hoping that each new piece of evidence brings us closer to recognition. The dogman exists. I have touched its bones, examined its muscles, and studied its teeth. I know its biology. I understand its capabilities. And I know that our wilderness is not as empty of mystery as we like to believe. So the next time you hike through deep forests, particularly in regions where sightings cluster, remember what I have learned. You are not alone in those woods. Something watches from the shadows, something that understands you better than you understand it. Something that has learned to remain hidden while hunting the same forests you walk through. That knowledge should not create fear but respect, awareness that the natural world still holds creatures beyond our current understanding. The cryptozoologist in me celebrates having documented a species that science does not acknowledge. The human in me struggles with the implications of apex predators operating unseen in public lands. The researcher in me knows that knowledge without proof is burden without validation. But the witness in me cannot deny what I saw, what I measured, what I documented during those 24 hours. The dogman is real, its biology is extraordinary, and that truth exists whether science accepts it or not. For more stories exploring creatures that exist in the shadows of accepted science, consider subscribing to this channel.